Today we have before us legislation that makes up a few of the Senate Republican policy priorities. Those are simplifying our tax code and making permanent tax relief for all Iowans by eliminating the short-sighted triggers in the 2018 tax reform bill. Additionally, we have before us the responsible phase-out and eradication of the inheritance tax, one of the most morbid tax policies we have in our code. Not only does Iowa have the capacity to do these measures, we must do these measures. As I mentioned in my committee comments, and I will mention it here on the floor, there are no joint budget targets yet, and we are awaiting the final REC read to understand implications of the federal legislation. Nevertheless, Iowa does have the financial capacity to deal with these priorities, and Senate Republicans will ensure that these priorities will be part of the final discussion to close out this session. In addition to my comments from committee last week, I'd like to add something else that's come up in the meantime. On the lines of the Federal CARES Act money, the last-minute restrictions placed in last week's legislation, let me simply say this. The federal government will not trounce over states' rights and freeze tax policy for the next 2 years here in Iowa. The framers of this country designed a constitution that laid out three general branches of government, generally co-equal, but they also laid out principles that powers not enumerated to the Constitution and the federal government are reserved to the states and the people. Specifically, the 10th Amendment says this: the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Colleagues, what was slipped into the CARES Act last week on the last minute was short-sighted and egregious. We will not hold up our tax policy based upon the whims of the federal government, and if our federal government overlords wish to continue down this path of a massive constitutional overreach on the normal business of state tax policy, then it's very likely that states will see the federal government in court. Mr. President, that concludes my opening comments.
Is there further discussion? Senator Yoakum, Senator from Dubuque, you are in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, members of the Senate. So let me start by saying that federal deductibility, getting rid of it, is something Democrats have wanted to do for as long as I have been here. Truly. And we want to do that for a couple reasons. One, very few people, when they're comparing taxes between states, look at the little asterisk that says Iowa has federal deductibility. We're one of 3 states that does that. And subsequently, our 8.98% individual income tax rate looks like one of the higher ones in the country. But when you put the federal deductibility on that, factor it in, our top rate really drops down to about 6.2%. Now we're smack in the middle of taxation. We rank about 30th out of the 50 states. So we've wanted to do that for a long time. In fact, many of our economic development directors have wanted us to do that as well, because it's actually hurt us in some efforts to recruit businesses to our state. So we have long wanted to do that, and if we were going to do that, we would lower the rates for those who are earning less than probably $100,000 a year, maintain the rates for those who earn a higher income, that they would continue to pay what they currently pay after federal deductibility is factored in. Now, the reason that the previous chairman of this committee put the guardrails in, so to say, the triggers, was to make sure that this state would be very fiscally responsible. Because we know when we get rid of federal deductibility, it's very costly. That transition is very costly. So the guardrails were there to make sure that when we transitioned and we met 2 triggers, that our revenues would hit $8.3 billion and that we would have a 4% growth over the previous year. So 104% growth. When those 2 things happened, then federal deductibility would go away. I'm going to stand here today and say it's very probable that we will hit those triggers before 2024. So I'm going to support that part of this bill. I think it's a good idea, something I and many others on this side of the aisle have advocated and supported for many years. Now, this one may cut you off a little bit, Senator Dawson. I actually spent some time reviewing information that the Department of Revenue provided, and they did a 5-year study, a trend line. They looked back over the previous 5 years on what our inheritance taxes looked like, who paid them, what kinds of income levels do those beneficiaries, where are they at? All kinds of great information, and I applaud the Department of Revenue for engaging in that study. And what I have pulled out of that study was that the vast majority of Iowans who are inheriting money from someone who has died earn less than $80,000 a year. Very much a middle-class family in this state. When my sister died 2 years ago, actually 2 years ago about this time, I was the executor of her estate, and so I became quite familiar between my father dying, my daughter dying, my sister dying, more than I wanted to know about death and what happens. And I remember the probate attorney that was working on Sandra's returns on her inheritance. Sandy never married. She had multiple sclerosis. She was engaged at one time, and her fiancé had cancer at one time. The treatment left his aorta weak, and had an aneurysm, burst, bled out in 10 minutes, and he died. So she's had kind of a dark cloud hovering over her life for a while. Subsequently, never married, no children, and wanted to leave her proceeds to her brothers, sisters, her nieces, and nephews. And we had to pay taxes on it, which is fine. We did. But after looking at what the Department of Revenue has put together in terms of who's really paying the tax, who's really getting the benefits from those who are leaving funds behind, my own personal experience, and by the way, that attorney said to me, Pam, I know you think that somehow the only people that you want to make sure inheritance taxes stay in place because it goes after the rich. He said, I do this for a living. I make sure that those who are very wealthy are able to shelter their income so that when they die, they never pay a tax. And the people who are paying it are the people you think you're protecting. All of those things have been circulating in my brain for several years. So today I'm actually going to support the bill, even though I opposed it in committee. I will say, however, that I think our timing is very off. For one thing, the Revenue Estimating Conference meets on Friday. There's no reason why we didn't wait till next week to do this. They very well may come out with numbers that show that we have hit our targets, the triggers, I should say. Because right now we're at about $8.2 billion and about 3.8% growth. But I have some concerns, because I truly believe that this state, like every state, has received billions of dollars in the past year from the federal government. And we're in line to get at least another $1.5 billion from the American Rescue Plan. And there are a few more concerns I have, and that is that the American Rescue Plan does have clawback provisions in it. And it does say that a state cannot directly or indirectly replace tax cuts they may impose between now and 2024 with money that we are receiving for pandemic relief. Now, I believe that that was put in there because we had a few southern states who said, well, we're going to cut cut taxes and we'll just fill in those tax cuts with this pandemic money we're getting from the federal government. And they said, no way. If you're going to do that, we're going to come back at you, and we want that money back, because that money is meant to provide relief for small businesses and families who have been hit hard by this pandemic, and to help local and state governments stay on their feet so that we can weather this pandemic and get the economy moving again. Because there are those unknowns, I've had some reluctancy. By the way, we are one of 6 states that still has an inheritance tax. And there are 12 states and the District of Columbia that have an estate tax, 2 very different kinds of taxes and how they're paid for. I might point out that the federal government also has an estate tax, but the first $11.3 million of an estate are already tax-free. Tax-free. No, farmers are not losing their farms over this. No, they are not. The handful who may have talked about that are farmers where beneficiaries, where there were multiple beneficiaries, and one of those beneficiaries wanted the cash. They didn't want the farm. And the other people who inherited didn't have the cash to buy them out. So that's a family problem, not a tax problem. I just want to make that clear. So today what we are doing is accelerating, eliminating the triggers. And today we are making a decision that Iowa will no longer have an inheritance tax, that too will be phased out over a 3-year period. So today I stand here and say, vote for the bill. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from Polk, Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I served on the subcommittee that was taking a look at the inheritance tax earlier this session, and I think I surprised my colleagues on the other side of the aisle when I said that I support this measure. I believe that love is bigger than government and any other institution, and that we should not, as a government, be deciding who deserves tax-free inheritance and who doesn't. And I'll give you an example. My mom is in her 80s now. She's the youngest of 10 kids. One of her dear, dear friends was gay. He never was allowed to live with the person he loved. They had houses across the street from each other because they feared they might lose their job. And there are several Iowans living in nursing homes across our state who never were able to get married, never able to have children because they were gay or lesbian or transgender. And our society is evolving, but we still have people who are hurting, and many of them have been disowned by their family members when they came forward. And so this bill will help Iowans who are lesbians, gays, transgendered, the whole LGBTQ plus community. And so I believe this is a good thing. My dad was an only child. My mom, as I said, was the youngest of 10. I had 18 aunts and uncles. And some of my aunts and uncles were unable to have children, and fertility treatment just wasn't what it is today back then. And they were closer to their siblings than anyone else. And so I truly don't believe that government should be saying who deserves a tax break from the persons that they love. So I think what we're doing here today is good for Iowa. And hopefully it will send a message that we are maybe more welcoming than some of the bills that we saw earlier this session. So thank you very much for bringing it forward, and I'm sure that the LGBTQ older Iowans will greatly appreciate this initiative.
Seeing no further discussion, the chair recognizes the senator from Potawatomi, Senator Dawson, for final remarks on Senate File 576.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues of the Senate. I will keep my comments somewhat abbreviated since I think we actually have a bipartisan bill here today that's going to advance Iowans' tax policy as well as removing a morbid piece of the code. So I would encourage all of my colleagues to join here and help send a strong message to our colleagues across the aisle that this is a good bill, it's good policy, and it puts Iowa in a great position going forward. A couple of comments I would say is that, the pandemic has caused a lot of damage to our country, and certainly that's been felt here in Iowa. Senate Republicans, as well as sounds like Senate Democrats now, want to work across the rotunda and get something done. But we have to have a balanced approach in dealing with this pandemic. Not just the pandemic, but what Iowa looks like beyond that. This bill provides tax relief for a vast majority of Iowans, where almost half of the impact of this bill goes to those making $60,000 or less. The bill provides tax relief for hardworking Iowans, nurses, cops, grocery store workers, everyone who worked through this pandemic and didn't have other options to receive relief. The bill also streamlines our tax code and makes permanent our tax code. Great changes going forward. One of the previous bills, the comment was made about we need to build Iowa back better. I would simply say this: stimulus is a one-time shot. Tax code change is permanent. What we have here today is building Iowa back better, a great code for the future. Mr. President, I move Senate File 576 be read for the final time and placed on its passage.
The senator from Potawatomi moves that Senate File 576 be read for the last time and placed on its passage. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion prevails. The Secretary will read.
Senate File 576, a bill for authorizing future tax contingencies, reducing state inheritance tax rates, and providing for the future repeal of state inheritance tax and state qualified use of inheritance tax, including effective date and retroactive applicable divisions being enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Iowa.
The senator from Potawatomi moves that the reading thus far be considered the last reading of the bill. Those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The motion prevails. Is the title agreed to? The title is agreed to. The question now is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of passage of Senate File 576 will vote aye. Those opposed vote no. The Secretary will open the voting system and receive your vote. Senator Zahn votes aye. Senator Green votes aye. Senator Celsey votes aye.